Hi, hello and welcome to the Bella Loves Patterns YouTube channel. I'm Bella, I'm the designer behind Bella Loves Patterns, and I'm here today to show you a two-part tutorial on the sewing of the Linda dress, which is my latest sewing pattern. In this tutorial that you're going to be seeing, I'm sewing the Linda dress with a long sleeve. The long sleeve is not included in the pattern, but there will be a post on Instagram guiding you on how to do the alteration that I do in the video. After I filmed, I realized that's not very easy to see, so there will be an Instagram post on how to do the alteration so you can make the sleeve. And the sleeve we're going to be making is this long sleeve with a sheared cuff. You might think it's complicated. It's not complicated. So I'll guide you through that. And if you have any doubts on how to make the sleeve, you can check the Instagram post and I will answer your questions. I'm splitting this video into two parts because it's quite long and I don't know, I might get bored on the first half. I'm going to see if I can add as well. God, the sun is decided to shine. It was raining. I'm going to see I'm hiding away from the sun. I'm going to see if I can add like the timing of each step, because I will see if I can add, because I haven't done a YouTube channel before and I don't know how to do that. Might have to Google. So that's the first part, and I will link the link below. They will be launched at the same time, and then you can just go to the second video. Some of the steps, if you're not sure and you have the sewing pattern, do check in the steps, because maybe some of the things are better explained in the sewing instructions, and some of the other things that's in the sewing instructions that you're not quite so sure, you can check in the video. So kind of one helps the other, but I try my best to get all the steps and everything nice, so you don't have what to ask. Anyway, I hope you enjoy, and let me know what you think, and if it is something I can make more in the future. Bye!
Let's get started with the making of our Linda dress. You can find all the things you need to make this dress in the pattern description in the link below. To make the Linda dress, you will need the Linda dress pattern. But in this version we are going to modify the sleeve. I'm going to make a longer sleeve with a sheared cuff. For that we need to add some paper to extend the sleeve, so I'm going to glue some extra paper. Next thing is to mark the seam allowances inside of the pattern, so they are 1 centimeter. So I'm going to mark actually on the armholes and on the side seams. I'm not going to be extending the side seams all the way down, because otherwise I'll end up with a very wide sleeve. Instead, I've just extended a grey line in the center of the sleeve, and from the grey line I'm measuring to the underarm seam, and then I copy the same measurement to the bottom of the sleeve, and I repeat the same process on the back side of the sleeve. So from the armhole I measure, and then I copy this measurement to the bottom half of the sleeve. I'll make a more detailed post on Instagram about how to do this alteration for the sleeve, so you have the correct measurements and everything detailed on the post. Here I'm just going to leave you with the visuals of how I've done the sleeve. The final sleeve, because I had not tested, turned out I think a little short. I could have added some 3 centimeters maybe. I'll give you the exact measurements of everything, how to do it on Instagram. So here I'm just going to add the curve at the bottom of the sleeve. The amount added here can vary between 2 centimeters and 4 or 5. Here I did 2. I could have done 4. I think it would have been better. So I'm just completing the curve, joining the center of the sleeve to the side seam, both side seams. You know, you look at it and then you go on correcting the curve the way you think it looks the nicest, and I think that's what I'm doing here.
Get kick.
I'm measuring to see if both sides of the sleeves they have the same measurement, and then now I'm adding the 1 centimeter seam allowance all around. I usually like to work without the seam allowance first, and then I add them at the end. You can see that I'm going to cut the sleeve, and some of it of the original is going to be cut out, and that's fine because otherwise the sleeve would have been too wide for the cuff. Now I'm going to be drafting the cuff, the rectangular cuff that's going to be sheared. So what I'm going to do is to measure my wrist, and the measurement of my wrist was 15 centimeters, and I am multiplying it by 3. Was 45 centimeters, and to that measurement I'm adding 2 centimeters extra. For the length of the sleeve I'm going to be working with, the height of my cuff is going to be 9 centimeters and the width 47. So here I'm drawing the cuff. It's going to be a rectangular shape. And I'm squaring the lines so I make sure everything is straight, and then I add 1 centimeter all around. I'm just going to check now the sides of the sleeves and see that they match. And if they don't, I need to trim it a little bit. Before I start any project, I always like to steam the full length of the fabric and remove the wrinkles and folds and everything. I'm going to cut the pattern with the fabric folded, so I fold the fabric along the selvages and make sure there are no wrinkles or folds. I lay all my pattern pieces and I match the grain line with the selvages. The pattern piece, the center front panel, I'm going to cut it not in a fold, so I'm leaving it to be cut later after I have freed some space on my table. And pin everything in place. You can use weights or however you'd like to cut your fabric. I like to cut with scissors, and the one pattern piece I'm cutting bigger than the actual pattern is the center back facing, because I'm going to be block fusing that. The center front caps, I need to cut this twice, so here I'm cutting the first set and then I need to repeat and cut it again. In regards to the bias binding that goes on the zip and the center front of, you know, the rouleau straps, I don't like to cut them using the pattern pieces, so what I do, I mark the bias grain onto the fabric and I mark my pattern pieces, and I just check the width of the pattern piece and I copy that onto the fabric. I find this way to be more accurate. I marked it 4 times, so 2 for the bias binding that will go on the zip, and a pair that will go on the center front caps. For the end of the zip, I also like to mark it onto the fabric rather than pinning. It turns out to be more accurate for such a small piece. Now we're just going to be block fusing the center back facings, and I'm separating my fabric, and I'm going to mark the wrong side with a chalk. My fabric has a very similar wrong and right sides, and I'm going to be cutting the interfacing. So just fusing them together. I'm using a cloth underneath so it doesn't stick to my ironing board. And then with the two layers together, I just place my pattern piece on and I cut it. Just make sure to check the grain line, and then I cut it following the pattern piece. We're going now to mark the dart, so following all the markings, and I'm going to chalk on the wrong side of the fabric. So now just joining the marks by making a straight line. I'm going to be adding a bias stay tape on the center back of the neckline. This bias stay tape, I place it at the center of the seam, so my seam allowance is 1 centimeter, so usually my bias tape tends to be 5 millimeters away from the raw edge of the fabric. The second tape I'm going to be adding to the dress is on the center back and is a straight grain tape. You can use a piece of interfacing as well. This one measures 1/2 inch. If you don't have a tape like this, you can always use a strip of interfacing instead. This dress is asymmetrical on the side seams, so we need to trim 5 millimeters from the left side leg. You can fold the pattern along the marked lines, but you can also trim 1/2 centimeter by eye. You're only going to be trimming on the left side panel. With the pattern pieces facing right side up, overlock the center back of the dress, the sides of the center front panel, and the center seam of the side panel. Don't overlock the side seams of the dress, both of the back panels and the side panels. These are going to be overlocked later. After that, you can press the overlocked seams. I do always press mine because my machine always adds a little bit of tension, and that helps to keep the fabric flat. Before I forget, the vent area on both panels are not overlocked, they're left raw. On the center back pattern pieces, pin the dart legs together, and the next step is to sew them. Press the dart bulk flat, and I like to use a wood clapper to keep the seam line flat. I then take the dart bulk and I press it towards the back. It's nice to do this over a ham or some surface that has some curve, so you're not pressing the dart completely flat, especially at the bottom where the point of the dart is. I also like to run the iron very lightly over the right side of the fabric, just to make sure everything's sitting nice and flat. And here I'm just trimming and evening out a little bit of the dart that was uneven. Next thing I'll do is to pin the whole center back of the dress, and I'm going to sew just the bottom half. There are some double notches, so I'm sewing from the top of the knot all the way down to the hem. I'm leaving the section of the zip without sewing, but I left it pinned together because I need the notches that's on the zip area to align. Next thing I do is to press the center back seam flat, just to remove any tension or anything. And I'm just highlighting the center back notches that's on the zip area. This is going to help me install the zip later and align with these notch marks. So here I'm just pressing the center back seam open. Next I'm going to prepare the bias binding that's going to go on the zip. So I press it wrong sides together in half, and then one half I press it under, and the other half I just leave it unpressed. My zip is longer than the opening on the center back, so I will need to shorten it. So here I'm double checking and marking 2 centimeters below the double notches on the center back. Across the zip tape I just back stitch 2 or 3 times, and then I trim the rest of the zip. Before I sew the zip, I like to steam the zip tape to remove any shrinkage. With the zip right sides together with the binding, the side that's not folded, I stitch along the zip tape 5 millimeters away from the edge of the tape. When you get to the bottom of the zip, you need to sink in the needle and move the zipper puller away so you can sew, otherwise your zip foot's not going to go through. And then you repeat the same thing on the other side of the zip. So you can see on both sides the zip was sewn 5 millimeters from the edge. If you have any excess of the fabric passing over, you have to trim it, and then we fold over the binding to cover the raw edge of the zip. This is quite a narrow binding, so I'm going to be hand tacking the binding along on both sides. This will make easier to sew without having to control the binding and the machine at the same time. So yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but it's totally worth it. And you can see both sides are binded, well, hand tacked, and then I'm just going to make sure that the binding sits in place and just running the iron over. And then now we're going to sew 1 millimeter from the edge, and this is a lot easier without having to handle the binding. Even with the binding hand tacked, this is quite a slow process, so take your time and don't rush. Next thing is to remove the hand tacking stitches and then press the bindings on both sides for a final press, and even the ends of the zip, and remove all the binding that extends beyond the length of the zip. So here it is, our zip, and then now we need to prepare the end of the zip, which is press the end of the zip wrong sides together like that, and then now you're going to press one side 1 centimeter down, measure it. It should measure about 1.5 centimeters, the folded edge, and we're going to create a step to make the back of the end of the zip a bit longer, so when we sew we catch it nicely. And I just fold it over and we create a 1 millimeter step. Now I'm just trimming the side edges. We're going to fold the end of the zip at the crease, and the side of the end of the zip that has the 1 millimeter higher is going to be the back, so don't worry to match it at the top. You just need to fold it at the crease and sew at the side seams at 1 centimeter. When sewing this, before you sew the second half of the zip, just make sure it's going to fit on the zip and kind of mark, because it could be that it's a bit more than 1 centimeter, depending on the fabric you're using. Sometimes it stretches. So we sew it, and then we double check with the end of the zip and trim the excess seam allowance and turn the end of the zip right side out. To keep the end of the zip in the right place, I like to use a small amount of Wonder Web, and here I have placed the end of the zip facing the wrong side. It didn't make a huge difference, but the long side of the end of the zip should be facing the back of the zip, so the side is not going to be visible. Because I'm using Wonder Web and it's only activated with heat, I have to press the end of the zip so it melts. With the right side of the end of the zip facing up, I sew 1 millimeter from the edge, and that little step on the back side of the end of the zip is caught. I like to mark 1 centimeter down from the top of the seam, and then I make sure that my center notches on the zip are also in place, and this little plastic on the zip is going to sit just below the 1 centimeter mark. Here I'm just roughly pinning the zip in place just to make sure that the zip is not going to be twisted.
Kick.
To sew the invisible zip on the center back, you will need the invisible zip foot. Depending on the machine you have, you might have other types, so just look out for that. Also the zip from top to bottom on both sides. And I'll be doing that all the way to the top of the seam on the center back. To sew the other side of the zip, I need to close the zip and transfer the center back notches that I have marked on both sides of the center back on the zip area to the zip tape, and then I'm going to match it to the other side of the back that hasn't been sewn yet. So I make sure that the zip is going to be sewn evenly. I also like to do the same thing on the bottom of the zip, so I have the seam stopping at the same place. Now I'm going to match the notch that's on the center back of the dress to the marking that's on the zip, and I cannot move that, otherwise the zip is not going to be sewn evenly on both sides. So now I just go ahead and I sew from top to bottom.
Kick.
Now you just need to close the zip to double check that the bottom of the zip is even and that the zip was placed in correctly all the way. After that, just steam the seam as you have sewn, and then you steam the zip through the right side of the dress. With the back facing up, overlock the bottom edge of the facings. Because my overlocker likes to add some tension, I also like to press my seam flat after I have sewn them. So this way they sit flat. The next step is optional, but I'm going to top stitch the overlocker down so I have a nicer clean finish for this. But you can totally leave it just overlocked. Now just quickly pressing to leave my edges flat. With the right sides facing, join the center back facing to the dress at the zip seam.
Gets kick.
To keep the seam close to the zip but not too close, maybe away by 3 millimeters, I'm going to be using a 1/2 foot. You can move your needle to the left. My machine I have to use a different foot because the machine needle doesn't move. Now we need to sew the top edge of the back facing to the dress. So now just position all the seam allowances towards the back facing. Pin both edges together and we're going to be sewing it at 1 centimeter. Cut off the binding that's inside of the seam allowance of the top to remove some of the bulk, and then after that cut the seam allowance on a diagonal. Trim the seam allowance on the back facing to half. Press the seam flat as you have sewn, and then we're going to open this seam, pressing the seam allowance all towards the back facing. Understitch on the back facing side 1 millimeter from the seam. Make sure that all seam allowances are towards the back facing. So as close as possible to the zip side, and then you copy the same position to the other side that you haven't sewn. Now we're going to press wrong sides together and we're going to trim the excess of the back facing on the side seams.